Hey everybody, and welcome to the Chit Chat. Today we're going to be doing a setup video for Pandemic Legacy. We'll shortly follow up this video with a how to play, and for both of the videos we're going to be using the prologue as a scenario. We want to avoid any spoilers in these videos, and therefore the prologue scenario is the best way for us to start by doing that. Anything that is not covered in this prologue video should be very well spelled out throughout the legacy cards. In addition, a lot of what you're going to see here will be done on a completely clean board, meaning we have not yet played on this board, and so it is completely spoiler free. I say this because I really want to hammer home that this video will not cause any story issues if you choose to watch it to its entirety. So here in a few seconds, we're going to pan down to the board. The rest of the video will mostly be my hands as I set up the board, and there will also be some editing magic. So as we say something will be set up, you're often going to see it set up immediately. So that's going to be the video. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you shortly. All right, as you can see, we're now looking at the overview board for Pandemic Legacy Season 2. In this video, like I said, we're going to cover the setup, and this is the board as you'll lay it out initially. The few first things you're going to need to do are basically going to be housekeeping and thematic steps. There are 3 havens on the board, and these are going to be marked by white dots with blue anchors inside of them. These are going to be your initial havens out in the middle of the ocean, and they're going to represent the bastions in which humanity has survived. You're going to need to name these. These can be any names you'd like. It's thematic, it's fun, it's for you and your individual groups. After you've done that, you're going to do one other setup step. There are a bunch of character sheets in the main box. So I believe there's actually 8 of these, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's actually 10 of these. So you're gonna have 10 of these. You're going to take one of these at random. It doesn't really matter. They are a little bit different, but not in a way that you're going to be able to know before the game starts, as it's going to affect how you're exposed. So what you're going to do is you're going to take these and you're going to create your own characters. Really quickly, I'm going to do that for myself, and then I will show you and we'll continue on. All right, so as you can see, I've now created my own initial character. What you're going to do is you're going to place a character's picture here. You're going to place their job here, which is typically going to be something similar to a medic or other role in the past. I went ahead and chose the administrator. It lets me once per turn as an action move one pawn to any other pawn. This is basically going to be the dispatcher action from other games. And I do apologize a little bit for the glare there, but this is what the character card should look like once it's completed. You will of course have a home set. Since we've not yet named the havens on our board, I did not set my home because I don't wish to do that for my group. But you'll also pick a home, and that's going to be where your pawn starts for the remainder of the campaign. You're going to have a lot of choices here. So there are 5 initial jobs and a bunch of character pictures here. A lot of things that you're going to be able to choose from. There are also scars that you're going to receive later, but that's not going to be relevant for this video. Now, even if you're playing with less than the full complement of players, you need to go ahead and create and name all 5 of the characters with 5 different powers when you start. Next up is going to be the setup of the board itself, and the first thing you're going to do here is you're going to look at the year track. So it is year 71 of the fall. That means it's been 71 years after the time in the initial Pandemic Legacy. So when we look here at the prologue and January, we get 36 supplies for each. All we're going to do to set up these supplies is we're going to take all of the supply cubes, which are the gray cubes in your box, and we're going to place them right here in the stockpile. In addition, we're then going to take and place all of the plague cubes right here. These plague cubes are going to be your green, clear plastic cubes. These are going to be used as you actually spread the disease throughout your population. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up our incident and infection track. The incident track will be this star-shaped green token here, and it will track the end game condition of the number of incidents. You have 8 incidents until the game ends. You'll get to this red skull here. The infection rate track here is going to relate to how many cards you draw from the infection deck. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take the infection deck, which is going to be this red deck here. We're going to shuffle it up really well, and we're going to place it over here on the infection deck draw pile. So we're going to consider that shuffled. I've gone ahead and pre-shuffled here, and I'm going to show you this just to prove that to you really quickly. Now we will place it right here. Okay, so now our infection deck is shuffled and placed. Our stockpile is here, and what we're going to do is we're going to supply the grid. The supply the grid step is where you as a team are going to be discussing where to take all of your stockpiled supplies and place them throughout the board. The reason this is going to be an important decision is as you deal cards over from the infection deck, it is going to remove a supply from the city that is infected. If all of the supplies are removed and you have to place or remove a supply, you're instead going to place a plague cube in that city. So there's a lot of strategic decision in where you want your supplies to be early on in the game. I'm going to quickly go ahead and do that, and we'll be right back. Alright, so as you can see, I've now supplied my grid. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this in the video, but I have chosen to go with a fairly balanced setup. The only places I have 5 cubes in are Sao Paulo because it is farther off to the edge, and Cairo because, well, in our Pandemic Legacy Season 1, the Black Disease happened to be the legacy element disease, and so I have a little bit of scars. You're also going to see that each of the havens are empty in cubes. You can't infect a haven throughout the infection setup, and therefore there's no reason to put any supplies on them in this stage, at my opinion. So now what we're going to do is we're going to infect the grid, and this is going to happen similar to how most infections happen throughout Pandemic. You're going to deal over the top 9 cards here, and then you're going to remove 1 cube from each city that you deal a card over for. If you deal 2 cards over for a single city, you'll remove 2 cubes from that city. I'm going to quickly deal these out. I'm going to try to keep it relatively organized so that you can see this on camera as well. So now you see we have our 9 initial cities out of here. I'm going to go ahead and remove these cubes, and then we'll move on. Okay, so now as you can see, I've removed cubes from the cities that have been infected, and I added these cubes back to the stockpile. These will be used throughout the game. Also, the cities that have been infected now go into your infection discard pile face up. This is also open information, so if you'd like to look at it through the game, you're allowed to do so. So we're going to move on to setting up the player deck. The first thing that you need to do in the player deck stage is typically you're going to choose 4 of these basically rationed events. These are going to be similar to the events in normal Pandemic. When I say choose, in the prologue in January, there will be really no choice. You start out with 4 rations, and there are 4 rationed events that come in the base game. You're going to unlock more of these as it goes, and as you win games, you'll reduce your funding by 2. As you lose games, you'll increase your funding by 2. So you may have less or more of these as the game progresses. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to take these 4 rationed events, and you're going to place them in your player deck. Your player deck is the one with this back, and will include cards like your produced supplies, and the cities that you're going to need for cures, travel, and building. In addition, it will also eventually include your epidemic cards. However, the epidemics won't be added at this stage because you do not want to deal them to players in the initial setup. So, I'm going to put these 2 together, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a quick shuffle. After we shuffle our player deck, what we're going to do is we're going to deal 2 cards to each player in a 4-player game, 3 cards to each player in a 3-player game, and 4 cards to each player in a 2-player game. So it does affect your player cards depending on the number of players in that game. Cards in this game are all going to be face up, and you're going to see a player's setup shortly. Since we're currently zeroed in on the board, I'm not going to show that. We're going to go ahead and move on. Now that we've dealt cards out to each of the players, what we're going to do is we're going to finish out the player deck by adding our epidemic cards. There should be 5 epidemic cards in the base game, and the way you're going to do this is you're going to place each of them in a stack of their own. We're going to create 5 separate stacks using the epidemic cards as the basis. We're then going to split all of the cards in the player deck evenly throughout these decks, and then we'll shuffle them individually. So, for example, I would deal each of them out a card at a time until I had dealt out all of the cards. Then I would pick up each pile individually and shuffle them, and then I would stack them on top of each other, not shuffling them further. The idea is they get a somewhat even disposition of the epidemic cards. That way you're not getting 2 or 3 in a row. It is still technically possible that you'll get multiple epidemic cards in a row, but it's less likely. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. And I've shuffled each of the 5 stacks. The player deck itself is going to go in this spot marked for the player deck, and you're going to be drawing throughout the game. If you're ever unable to draw from this deck, it is one of the ending game conditions, and you will lose if you're unable to complete your objectives prior to that. The last thing for us to do, however, is to go ahead and read a few of the story pieces. There's a prologue story that's going to come on this small notepad here, and it's going to be marked with prologue on the back. The prologue will also have some minor rule changes and differences, but basically it just says you're not making any permanent changes to your game in the prologue itself. The prologue will also have one mandatory goal, and this mandatory goal is just to build 3 supply houses or supply centers on the board. Objectives are always going to go right here in this objective area on the board. You can have multiple objectives, and this is not a limiting space, so if you have more objectives than fit, you will also still place them. At this stage, all we really need to do is show you a character setup. So, give me a few seconds and we'll pan directly to a character setup and we'll explain that. Okay, so now we're going to look really briefly at a player's setup. All you really need for a player setup are to have the 2 action references off to the side of their character sheet. This character sheet is of course unfilled, and give them their pawn in their color. The pawn won't be placed on the board until you've determined a home for them, because that is the sanctuary they'll start out in, and in addition they will have their 2 cards here. There's a hand limit of 7, so they could have up to 7 cards here throughout the game. Each player is going to have a similar setup to this, and that's going to be how the game plays out. At this stage, you're actually ready to get your first game going, so if you'd like to learn how to play from us as well, that will be coming in the next video. Hope you have a great day, and enjoy gaming.